Hey everybody, and welcome back to what is probably one of our last episodes of James Bond Revisited, or at least until they release a new James Bond movie, or even sign a new James Bond, while we unpack No Time to Die. Now, of course, when I did my regular review of this movie, I really couldn't dig too deeply into spoilers because, didn't want to ruin the surprise for everybody, but suffice to say, this is a monumental film for the franchise. So, I think it was about time that we did an episode of James Bond Revisited that unpacked the movie a little bit. So, No Time to Die is the 25th movie in the James Bond series, and of course, it was delayed quite a while due to COVID-19. It was originally supposed to come out in April of 2020, but we only got it on October 8th, 2021, coincidentally or not, my birthday. So, this movie will forever be known as the James Bond movie that finally killed 007. Now, one thing that I should preface this with is that James Bond's death in this movie shouldn't be taken as the ultimate death of the character. I think that this is definitely the death of Daniel Craig's version of James Bond, but it's no different than, say, if Batman was to die in a movie. You'd still see another actor playing Bruce Wayne picking up the cowl as Batman a couple years further down the line. I mean, granted, we've never had Batman get killed, but, I fully expect them, within a few years, to sign another actor to play James Bond, and to have him be basically the same character. I don't think the intention of anybody involved with this movie ever was to kill James Bond permanently. I think really what they were trying to do is just continue on the experiment that they were doing with this character, where James Bond in the Daniel Craig versions of the films was never really the suave and sophisticated secret agent that we knew from, the other 20 or so installments of the series. This James Bond had a lot more pathos, He was a guy that wasn't as quick to womanize. He had a lot of heart. He was betrayed, of course, in Casino Royale by Vesper Lynd. So they were really trying to do something different with this iteration of Bond, and I think that having him die at the end of No Time to Die is actually a great way of making him come full circle. Now, apparently, Daniel Craig indeed was reluctant to return to the role after Spectre because he had messed himself up physically doing the part. And of course, the movie opened to pretty bad reviews and mixed box office for a James Bond movie, considering the triumph that Skyfall was. Nevertheless, they were able to entice Daniel Craig to come back with, this one promise, that he would be the first actor to ever play a James Bond death scene. Now, even Daniel Craig in interviews since the movie's come out has said that the intention has never been to actually kill off the character permanently. And sure enough, if you watch No Time to Die right until the end credits, you'll see at the end of the film very clearly written, James Bond will return. Now, when he will return is the big question, and what James Bond will be like when he returns. So many actors have been associated with the part already. Some people say it's going to be Regé-Jean Page. Other people say it'll be Tom Holland, which I think is pretty unlikely. Other people say it might be Tom Hardy. I think in the end it's going to be a James Bond that was totally unexpected. Probably an actor that we've all heard of at this point, but would never actually associate with James Bond. That's kind of how Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson do things. They never want to give you too obvious a choice. I think the only Bond that you could potentially have predicted maybe was Pierce Brosnan because he had been associated with the role before. But I really think that when they do another James Bond movie, it's going to be somebody completely unexpected, like maybe a Jamie Bell or something like that. I'm pretty confident that the next Bond will be a male and will be British or at least European. But other than that, who really knows? So, back to the film. Originally, Danny Boyle was supposed to direct the film and co-write the screenplay with John Hodge, but they left in August 2018 due to the commonly cited creative differences, and a lot of people thought that they were let go because they wanted to kill James Bond. Now, we know now, of course, that this was always the intention, so whatever they wanted to do with the character, I'm sure it was probably pretty radical, but maybe too radical for Eon. They ended up hiring Cary Joji Fukunaga, who of course was famous for having done season 1 of True Detective, and apparently they actually approached it with the idea that they would kill off James Bond, but Fukunaga, to his credit, told them that they had to earn that ending. And that would be his responsibility, of course, to decide how they were going to earn this ending that everybody wanted. And, to work on the screenplay, he had Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, who, of course, have been writing James Bond movies for years, and I think are often underrated because, a lot of people sometimes mock the James Bond screenplays as being assembly line or not good enough, but I think that Purvis and Wade always do a really good job. It's sometimes the other writers that they bring in that don't really mesh well. And, of course, James Bond movies, as much as I love them, is definitely movie making by committee, so I don't think Purvis and Wade's vision of the character has ever really been fully realized. So for this film, Fukunaga himself has a screenplay credit, and then they brought on Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Now, of course, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is famous for having done Fleabag, and of course, everybody assumed by bringing Waller-Bridge on, they'd be making No Time to Die quote-unquote woke. The people that said this, however, probably have never actually watched Fleabag before, because it's probably the least woke show on TV. I mean, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is one that likes to push the envelope in a lot of ways, so I was pretty comfortable when I heard that she was signing on to do the film, because I think probably what they wanted was to just give the character, a sense of humor. And of course, when I actually interviewed Daniel Craig just before this movie came out, one of the things I mentioned to him was the fact that I thought this was one of the funnier James Bond movies, to which he replied,
You didn't think the others were funny?
I thought they were funny, but this one was hilarious, though, at times, and I really liked that.
I'm joking. That was a gag. A bad one, clearly. I'm glad I'm not writing them.
So in terms of screenplay, I think that No Time to Die probably has the best screenplay that we've gotten since, I don't know, maybe Casino Royale or maybe Skyfall. It depends. And as much as Paul Haggis, is kind of loathed and despised these days, I think he did a really amazing job when he did Casino Royale. And I think he really helped relaunch the character in a smart way. And I think that John Logan and Sam Mendes kind of did something similar with Skyfall a couple of years ago. So this is definitely one of the stronger screenplays that we've had in a bit. And I would actually give the screenplay of this movie a solid 9 out of 10. So what's the story? Well, interestingly enough, No Time to Die picks up hot on the heels of Spectre, which is a surprise because the movie was so poorly received and is maybe one of the least seen James Bond movies ever. I think a lot of people skipped Spectre when it hit theaters because the reviews weren't great. Of course, to really appreciate No Time to Die, you have to have seen Spectre because it picks up on all the threads. They bring back Léa Seydoux' Madeline, who's with Bond now, and Bond apparently has retired, and they're trying to live happily, and he's trying to bury the ghost of, Eva Green's Vesper Lynd. One of the things that I didn't really like about Spectre was that I felt that the relationship between Madeline Swan and Bond was never as deep as they tried to convey. I never really felt that they were in love at the end of the series, but I think that really No Time to Die rectifies the situation a lot by giving Léa Seydoux a lot to do as Madeline Swan. And I think from, I originally considered her one of the B-list Bond girls. After watching Spectre, now she would probably be in my top 5. I mean, I think she's really an outstanding Bond girl, and Seydoux is a great actress, so it's nice that they gave her some really good material to chew on. So in this movie, Blofeld, once again played by Christoph Waltz, who I never really liked in Spectre and I still don't really like in No Time to Die, is orchestrating this revenge plot against James Bond, and James Bond thinks that Swan was involved. Of course she wasn't, but, they separate, and 5 years later, Bond is kind of living off the grid and is approached by Jeffrey Wright's Felix Leiter to help him rescue a scientist, played by David Densick, who's invented this kind of nanobot technology that makes this amazing bioweapon that is coded to an individual's DNA, making it lethal to the target and the relatives, but harmless to others. Now remember this, of course, because this becomes very important in the climax. So Bond goes on the rampage and meets up with the new 007, played by Lashana Lynch. Now, of course, this was also very controversial because all the headlines screamed, oh, there's a new female black James Bond. Of course, she's not playing James Bond, she's playing 007 because it's a designation that, MI6 gives out to agents. So, of course, there would be a new 007, and I think that Lynch, for all the crap that she was taking in the lead up to the movie, is actually really good, and she has kind of a nice give and take with Daniel Craig, especially towards the end of the movie where they become kind of partners and clearly respect each other. I always really thought her performance was good.
Permission for Commander Bond to be redesignated as 007. It's just a number.
Very well. Agreed.
So getting back to the plot, so Bond, of course, is betrayed, and Felix Leiter is actually killed in the first big twist that this movie has coming, and it's got a lot of twists coming up. Bond also teams up earlier on in the film with a CIA agent named Paloma, who's played by the great Ana de Armas, who I think blew everybody away in this movie. Nobody ever really saw her as an action heroine, but I think she really nailed it. I mean, she doesn't look physically tough, but she's gorgeous, has amazing attitude, and I think that probably her role here is what landed her the lead in Ballerina, which is the upcoming spin-off to John Wick. So really good job for her in this movie, even though she only really has that one extended sequence and isn't super important to the plot. She really does kind of steal the show, and she's got great chemistry with Craig, of course, who was her co-star in Knives Out and apparently pushed for her to get the role.
You were excellent.
You too. Next time, stay longer.
I will.
Eventually, Bond returns to London to try and get to the bottom of the plot and realizes that this villain named Safin, played by Rami Malek, is the one who's in charge of everything, and of course has a deep connection with his former lover, Madeline Swan, who we learn has a baby that might belong to James Bond. Who knows? It's 5 years old. What a surprise.
She's not yours.
The blue eyes. Just
Anyway, it all ends on an island, of course, like most of the James Bond movies do, with a big extended shootout that involves James Bond killing lots of bad guys and eventually dying in the end of the movie in a big bit at self-sacrifice because his DNA is coded to the evil bioweapon. So if he gets out, his daughter and his lover are both in big trouble. So what can you do? Bond heroically dies. Although I would say, despite what Daniel Craig has said, this has always seemed to be a soft death to me. You know, I think whenever you see a character like James Bond die, unless you see him get decapitated and then swing the head around in front of you, I really don't think the character is actually dead. You know, that said, I don't think he's going to. I think that it would be a cheesy move, but I still think they hedge their bets just a little bit. So, as I said, the screenplay for this movie, probably about a 9 on 10, but the big disappointment for me is in terms of the villains. I think Rami Malek's a super nice guy. I had a great time interviewing him, and I think he has a really cool look as Safin, but they don't give him enough to do. I mean, he's just kind of your generic evil madman who's kind of out of the movie for the first half. Unfortunately, his thunder is kind of stolen by Blofeld, once again played by Christoph Waltz, and they spend way too much time on this character. I mean, Blofeld is probably the greatest villain in James Bond history, but the rebooted Blofeld played by Christoph Waltz to me has always been really lame, and the fact that they try to make him and Bond kind of brothers never really worked for me. I think what they should have done was just kind of ignore the character or totally reboot Blofeld. You know, pretend that the guy that was playing Blofeld wasn't actually Blofeld and then make Rami Malek Blofeld. Hopefully they do go back to the character and Spectre in the next series of James Bond movies, but they really need to start over again because the Blofeld here just never really worked for me. So the villains for me are a letdown. I'd only give them about a 5 out of 10. For me, it's the weakest point of the movie. However, Bond girls, one of the strongest points. As I said earlier, Madeleine Swann was not one of my favorite Bond girls in Spectre, but I think she's terrific here. I mean, Seydoux is an amazing actress. She's been good in so many movies, and they really give her a lot of material here. I think that Fukunaga and Waller-Bridge, everybody involved knew exactly how to write for her, gave her a lot to chew on, and she's terrific. You really feel that her and Daniel Craig's James Bond in this movie are in love, which I think, you know, brings the franchise full circle. One of the things that's really interesting about this movie is that Fukunaga was heavily inspired by On Her Majesty's Secret Service. The score by Hans Zimmer has a lot of nods to that movie, and it really does feel kind of like the most emotional and epic Bond movie since then. I mean, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was always considered the longest Bond movie at 2 hours and 20 minutes, and No Time to Die actually beats it, running at 2 hours and 43 minutes. It's a little too long in my estimation, but they do earn the running time because the love story is quite strong. In addition to Lea Seydoux as Madeleine Swann, you also get Lashana Lynch as Nomi, who would probably kick my ass for calling her a Bond girl, but hey, she's great. And of course, you get Paloma, played by Ana de Armas. And man, she is great. And call me crazy, but she's pretty good looking, isn't she? And then, of course, you get Naomi Harris back as Moneypenny, who, of course, turns out to be another great ally of Bond's in this film. And I always loved her and thought she was great in the series. And if anything, I'd kind of like them to bring her back as Moneypenny and maybe Ralph Fiennes back as M and Ben Whishaw back as Q. But I guess it's probably not going to happen if they're rebooting the character somewhat. Anyway, Bond girls in this movie, very strong. I'd give it a 10 out of 10. Love all the Bond girls in this film. So what does No Time to Die not really have? Gadgets, I would say. I mean, I think that Ben Whishaw as Q gets a pretty good role in the film. They do reveal that he's gay, which I think was a nice nod. Of course, Bond is completely cool with it and doesn't even raise an eyebrow, which I think makes sense because, you know, it is the 21st century after all. He doesn't really outfit him with much equipment to this movie, but becomes very important in the last act when he's trying to help Bond kind of decode this evil bioweapon. And of course, he's crushed when he realizes that Bond's going to sacrifice himself. I was sad too, Q. So gadgets were pretty lame in this film, but otherwise, I mean, I think No Time to Die really holds up as a pretty good Bond movie. It's loaded with action, has got a great car chase in the opening teaser, which is one of the longest in the franchise's history. Now, if I have a problem with the movie, is that I think it becomes a little too generic of a shoot 'em up towards the end of the film when he infiltrates Safin's island. Now, according to the internet tallies here, Bond actually only kills 14 people, which is a bit on the low side for a James Bond movie, but it didn't really feel that way. I mean, the end of the movie, he's just running around machine gunning baddies, and I almost thought it was like a video game. One of the things that was kind of disappointing to me was that he doesn't get a really good physical adversary in this movie. You know, in Spectre, at least he had Dave Bautista, and they had that amazing fight scene. I think the problem is, though, that Daniel Craig really hurt himself doing that, and I don't know if they were able to do that physically for him here. So that's a bit of a disappointment, but it's got lots of cool stunts, and I think Fukunaga really did choose an amazing cinematographer to shoot this movie. I really like what Linus Sandgren did, and I think it's one of the best looking Bond movies since Skyfall. One of the other things I have to mention, of course, is the score by Hans Zimmer. I think Hans Zimmer, his entire career, has always wanted to do a James Bond score, and you can really tell in the scores for Inception, and especially Sherlock Holmes' Game of Shadows, that he really likes John Barry, especially his score for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So this must have been like a dream assignment for him. And of course, he reuses a lot of really cool John Barry themes in this movie, and they end it with Louis Armstrong's We Have All the Time in the World. So the score for this movie gets a strong 9 out of 10 for me. A little too self-referential at times, but I really liked it. So how does No Time to Die stack up against the other James Bond movies? Hard to say. When it came out originally, I gave it about an 8 on 10, but I have to say, I'm always a little bit overwhelmed by James Bond movies when I see them, just because I'm such a huge fan of the franchise, and I'm trying to think, oh, how does it stack up with the others? In terms of Daniel Craig's run as James Bond, I would put it square in the middle. I still think that Casino Royale is probably one of the greatest James Bond movies ever made, and definitely Daniel Craig's strongest James Bond film, but right behind it is Skyfall, which of course is terrific and has a really good Daniel Craig performance. I think Daniel Craig is amazing in this movie. I think that it would probably be pushed up just a little bit above Skyfall if it had better villains, but it doesn't, so it's right in the middle. I gave it about an 8 on 10 then, and I would probably stick to that now, maybe an 8.5 out of 10, because I liked it a little bit more rewatching it than I did when I saw it the first time. Pleasantly surprised. An excellent James Bond movie with a terrific performance as James Bond by Daniel Craig. It's his last one, but it's a great one. In terms of its reception, I think critically it was extremely well received. One of the best reviewed James Bond movies ever. Got an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty strong for a James Bond film, and I'm glad that people really sent off Daniel Craig with a lot of critical praise. The business run of it was a little bit different though. I mean, it was always bound to be a bit of a disappointment just because, you know, we're in a pandemic and it was never going to be able to have the same numbers as other James Bond movies did. I think the fact that it ultimately grossed about $160.8 million in the United States and Canada is actually a pretty strong total, even though the worldwide gross of the movie came in at about $774 million, which is way below the $800 million worldwide that they needed in order to break even. I think the film eventually will make money because of streaming and home video and all that, but I think inevitably it wasn't going to do as well as the other films in the franchise. And had it not come out during COVID, I really think it probably would have been a much bigger hit. Maybe not quite as big as Skyfall, but definitely bigger than Spectre. So I don't think it would be fair to call this a box office disappointment at all. It's still one of the highest grossing movies of the year, and I think that people still have an appetite for James Bond. But what I think really makes James Bond great is the fact that there's a bit of scarcity involved. They're not just pumping out James Bond movies every year, and there's no James Bond extended universe, which I really think would kind of kill the franchise. I got a little bit nervous when Amazon and MGM started talking about a deal because I could see Amazon wanting to do a James Bond series. Luckily, we've got Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, who are never going to let that happen, and as long as they remain the stewards of the franchise, I think we're in pretty safe hands. So, No Time to Die, definitely the last James Bond movie for a while, but I would imagine within the next 4 or 5 years, we'll get a new James Bond and a new James Bond era to, you know, obsess over like we did the Daniel Craig era. I'm very excited to see where this franchise goes, but as far as I'm concerned, No Time to Die left things on a pretty nice note. So that's the end of James Bond Revisited for now anyway. I'd like to thank my editor, Nick Bosworth, who always did a great job putting together this series with me. And, you know, I hope we're back before long. It's been a pleasure doing this series, and I hope that you've all enjoyed listening to it.
I'm going to tell you a story about a man. His name was Bond. James Bond.